just a perfect segue, that idea of walking away from the things that confuse us, walking away from the path that doesn't work anymore, that's not serving us anymore. So in this 4 agreements, the third agreement is don't make any assumptions. Walk away from those assumptions. Today is the day you walk away from those assumptions. So I was probably in elementary school when I learned that familiar phrase, probably familiar to a lot of you, never assume, because if you assume, you make an ass of you and me. That's right. So if you're doing the math, I've had more than 40 years of knowing that saying. So why is it still so hard? Why is it still so hard to not assume things about other people, about how they feel about you, about what they're thinking, about what they meant when they said something? A couple of weeks ago, I got a little bit irritated with a friend, and so I did what I often do in that situation. I took myself for a walk. And usually if I can take myself for a walk and I can put my feet on the ground and I can breathe in some mountain air and maybe lean up against a tree for a while or sit on a stone and just really ground myself, then I find that those sort of ego needs start to fall away and some of those petty hurts get put in perspective. And on this day, that didn't happen. Here's what happened instead. So, I go out on the walk, and I've made some assumptions about this friend, and I have 4 hours out near Mount Mitchell. And I have 4 hours to really fill in the details of that story. I mean, I had a full-fledged picture of why he had said what he said. And then I started going into his childhood and making up some backstories to go with the story. My characters really had depth by the end. In fact, when I walked off that mountain, I no longer had an assumption. I had a full-length novel and an option for a movie script. Yeah, it wasn't really helpful. I know the truth, as I'm sure many of you do, that our lives and our relationships, our work relationships, our intimate relationships, just the people we bump into day to day, all of those relationships, they just go better when we don't make assumptions about the other person. When we can clearly express our needs, and when we can ask for clarification if we haven't understood something. So we don't have to assume we know why someone is saying something or behaving a certain way. Well, in fact, I probably should clear the air a little bit here. Andy, I noticed last week that you and Christy went into the office and closed the door after the staff meeting, and I'm pretty sure you were talking about me. And I think it was because of something I said in the meeting. I think I know what it was that I said in the meeting, but do you want to tell me why you were talking behind my back?
Well, frankly, we weren't talking about you. Christy and I were talking about the upcoming photo shoots on October 1st, 2nd, and the 3rd. And the sign-up sheets are out on the hallway. And volunteers are needed. But we weren't talking about you. You didn't even come up in the conversation. Sorry.
I didn't even come up?
No.
So why do we make up these stories, do you think? I'm sort of glad I had this recent hiking experience because it helped me clarify something internally about why I do this. I like my assumptions. I like the stories I can make up about them. Not because they make me happy, they rarely do, but because they make me feel smart. They make me feel like I've figured out a mystery. Like somebody might have been trying to get away with something, but I was one step ahead of them, and I kind of figured out what was going on. My stories tell my controlling mind that nobody's going to pull the wool over my eyes. I may not understand your behavior, but give me a 4-hour hike and I will figure it out. Of course, a 10-minute phone call may have been easier and may have given me a clearer and less painful answer, but where's the fun in that? One reason we make our assumptions, I think, is because our busy little minds are out there scanning the horizon for trouble. And we convince ourselves that if we can create these stories about all that potential trouble, we'll be able to keep ourselves safe. If we can see where the plot is going, we may be able to head off trouble at the pass. But here's the thing. There may not be trouble at the pass until we assume there is, and then there is because we've put it there. We make these assumptions to keep us safe, but in fact, they often create pain that wasn't necessary. And many of our assumptions come from our old stories. We make the current behavior of someone fit into a behavior that's familiar to us. So let's say you grew up with a person in your family who would give you the silent treatment for hours before blowing up in a rage. And now here's your friend behaving very quietly. And so suddenly you think, I think my friend is raging mad. When in fact, your friend may just be quietly observing the situation because that's their nature. Maybe your friend is just a quiet observer. So when we go into these old stories, we put this template that we have over a current situation and we read it through those eyes. Then we believe that we've figured something out, whether or not it's true, and we try to fit the current situation into the boxes that we already have located around our bodies and our brains. And when we do that, we deprive ourselves of an authentic experience of the person who's right in front of us. So we may make assumptions in an attempt to keep ourselves safe, or we may make them because it fits with our previous experience. But I think one of the most common reasons we make assumptions is because we really expect other people to read our minds. If you don't behave towards me in a way that is pleasing to me, I can come to one of two conclusions. Either it's because you're just kind of mean, or you're kind of stupid. Because if you don't know what I want, without me telling you, maybe you're a little on the dense side. On the other hand, if I assume you're not dense, and you know what I want, even though I haven't told you, and you don't do it, well, that's just kind of rude. Why wouldn't you want to be pleasing to me? If you really loved me, I wouldn't have to tell you how to please me. You would just know. It sounds crazy, sort of, when we say it out loud, but how often do we put the people around us into this no-win situation? We can't tell you what we want because that would mean you didn't love us enough to already know. And then when we don't tell you and you don't do it, you're the problem. Ruiz writes that the problem with making assumptions is that we believe they are the truth. We could swear they are real. So how do we let go of our attachments to these deep beliefs? Well, first we just have to become aware of them. Just about like anything else in our life that we need to change, you can't change what you're not aware of. So it takes a lot of pausing. It takes a lot of breathing. We notice. We pay attention to that little part of ourselves, of our minds, that so quickly becomes a victim or a judge. We recognize when we've taken something personally or when we've started to make an assumption. Awareness requires a lot of discipline. To become aware, we have to pause, we have to ask ourselves, are our stories true? And usually our first answer will be, well, yes, because they do seem so real to us. And then we may need to go into Byron Katie's The Work. I don't know if you all know that, but she has a series of questions you can ask yourself about situations that are bothering you. And the first one is it true? And we usually answer, of course it's true. I made it up in my head, it must be. So then you have to ask yourself the second question, can you absolutely know it's true? So we pause. We question ourselves. We examine our beliefs. We begin to become aware. And once we're aware of how often we're making assumptions, we can begin the transformation. Ruiz talks about the need to be as disciplined as a warrior with our minds, constantly scanning our thoughts to see where they're coming from and what they're based on. It's kind of like, I think, the fourth of the 12 steps. We need to keep searching and making a fearless inventory of the thoughts that are keeping us in fear or confusion or just drama. And then, when we see them, we can choose. That's that moment of choice. You have that choice to replace those thoughts with different thoughts. So that programs like the Four Agreements or Byron Katie's The Work can help us flip the thought. Transforming old patterns into new ones requires a lot of practice. After years or decades of taking things personally, of making assumptions, we can't just try this once and expect our lives to change overnight. Suddenly, nirvana, we've got it. But each time we begin, each time we take that pause, we notice, we make that choice, we start to break the power. We break the power of that habit. And we can start with little things and then move to bigger things. And over time, we have new habits in place. And each time we make that switch and we break that power of that old way of thinking, we are taking a step on a way of life that is less confused, less fearful, more joyful, more authentic, more loving. And who doesn't want that?
Thank you, Rev. Laura. In all honesty, we were talking about you. Don't tell her what we said. Hi, I'm Rev Andy, and I am grateful to be here. I'm happy to be part of this team. I'm glad this is my spiritual home, and I am grateful to share the lesson today with Reverend Laura. I get the blessing of finishing up the book with chapter 4, always doing your best. Always doing your best. How many people have heard the expression, perfect is the enemy of good? Have you heard that? Perfect is the enemy of good. Well, at the end of 2015, I finished up a long career as a musician, and musicians are perfectionistic to their core. They are never satisfied, and perhaps in a way that's good because you're always striving, but when you're constantly tearing yourself down because you don't reach that pinnacle of perfection, it becomes a problem. Now, I had the good fortune of attending Indiana University, which is one of the best, go IU. Yeah, IU is one of the best music schools on the planet, and it was my good fortune to go there. I showed up rather naive. I'd come from a small Midwestern school where I was the big fish in a little pond. And I got to this place where there were people from all across the world, and they were amazing musicians. And they were spending hours a day in a practice room, sometimes 8 to 10 hours a day, in a room no bigger than a closet, practicing scales, practicing recital pieces, auditions. And I took that up, and I started practicing about 8 hours a day. And I got better, but I never got perfect. I never reached that perfection. And to tell you about that, I had a graduate recital, and I played all these amazing pieces. And afterwards, I was in the hallway. People come around behind stage, and they'll shake your hand and say, "Nice job." And this one couple came up and said, "Andy, that was terrific. We really appreciated your concert." And they shook my hand, and I went and said, "Well, I missed that F sharp, and I was a little bit out of tune, and this piece was a little slower than I wanted to play it, and it was the piano player's fault." And then they shook my hand and went away, and my best friend was standing next to me, and he said, "Dude," they said that back then, "Dude, what did you just do?" They came up and they gave you a heartfelt thank you because you touched them in some way, and you dumped on them that you weren't perfect. Rather than saying, "Thank you, I'm glad you came, I'm glad you enjoyed yourself, I'll see you next concert." I went off on the perfectionistic thing. Now, that was not helpful, but it was a learning moment, obviously, because I'm talking about it years later. After IU, I graduated and auditioned, and I was fortunate to get a job and played for years and years in a professional ensemble and strived very hard to make a name for myself as a musician, and so much so that I commissioned a concerto that I premiered at an international music conference. People from across the world were there, reviewers and critics were there, and I was in the back warming up in that little room no bigger than a closet. I was playing scales and warming up, and I was spinning up here. I'm going to screw up. They're going to laugh at me. They're not going to like the piece. And it just spun. And in a moment of grace, just like that, I realized all I have to do is go out and do my best. Do my best, and that's going to be good enough. They're going to like the piece. They don't know it. It's a contemporary piece, so nobody's ever heard it. It's a premiere. I went out and I played my best. I had a smile on my face. I had fun, and the audience loved it. So, in that moment of grace, I gained a great deal of peace that carried over the rest of my career. I just showed up and I did my best. I was not so worried about what other people were thinking. I'm a good player. I played, did my best, and that's that. Now, when you do your best, you have no regrets. You can't do better than your best. So if you're always doing your best, you have no regrets. I was telling my father-in-law, Harry, at dinner the other day, he asked me, "So what you doing on Sunday?" "Well, I'm talking at church." "Oh, really? What are you talking about?" "Well, I'm talking about the 4th chapter, always do your best." And this guy's got a sharp mind for an 84, well, for anybody, but he's 84, and he came up with an old adage that he had heard at some point. Good, better, best, never let it rest until your good becomes better and your better becomes your best. Pretty cool, huh? I'll say it one more time. Excuse me. Good, better, best, never let it rest until your good becomes better and your better becomes your best. So, I'm going to do a little demonstration here. I hope you're up for some fun. You've never seen this before. Hi, I'm Andy, and this is my first day of band. I'm going to play the tuba. So that was my best on my first day of band. Maybe after a couple of weeks, it might have been better. And then you get into junior high school. All right. So that was my best in junior high school. And then high school, marching band, it was more about girls than it was about music. But then I eventually got off to college. And my better was a little bit better. Excuse me. And trust me, my better tomorrow will be better than today. So, our best is never static. It's always changing. If you have the flu, you're not going to feel as good as you do on a day that you feel, healthy, and your best is going to be different. So just understand that doing your best is taking action at the moment as you are. Now, we can have many great ideas in our minds, but until we take action, they never materialize. And that's why doing your best is something that we need to commit ourselves to. Doing our best at every moment, under every circumstance, no matter what you judge it to be. If it's your best, there are no regrets. Now, doing your best is it's the agreement that ties all the other ones together. There's impeccable with your word. Reverend Darlene talked about that 2 weeks ago. And here it's on page 26. The word is just not a sound or a written symbol. The word is a force. It is the power you have to express and communicate, to think and thereby to create the events in your life. All of the events. And when I was reading that, a scripture came up, and it's Matthew 12, 36 and 37, and it goes like this. I tell you, on the day of judgment, you will have to give an account for every careless word you utter, for by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Now that's not in some far-off time when, the big God, white hair, beard, sitting on the throne, judges you. The judgment day is here and now, right here and now. And it's the creative power of our words that we use that create heaven or hell on earth. So by being impeccable with our words, we choose our life. We choose how things unfold in our life. So be impeccable with your words. And by doing our best, one day may be better than another. But we always do our best. If we speak ill of a partner, of a colleague, we can come back and do it better the next time. Always doing your best. Now, Reverend Jack Bomar last week talked about never taking anything personally. And Don Miguel Ruiz says it like this: either way, either being criticized or complimented, it does not affect me because I know what I am. I don't have the need to be accepted. I don't have the need to have someone tell me who I am. And this goes back to our basic unity principle number 2. We say the first one every Sunday. We are one power, one presence active in the universe and in my life, God the good omnipotence. If we go to the basic unity principle number 2, it's we are a manifestation of that one power and that one presence, and that means that we are also what? Good. We are divine in nature. It is our true essence. And so if somebody comes up to you and says something and you feel like you want to take it personally, if you go to that truth that you are a child of God, an emanation of the divine, you don't have to, because you are divine in nature. And if we continue to do our best to understand the truth of who we are, Reverend Darlene says it every week. She comes up here and says, we're here to heal the case of mistaken identity. And that's just what's happening here. We are divine in nature. That's who we are. And then Reverend Laura very eloquently spoke about not making assumptions. And what I heard her say was, it is always better to ask questions than to make an assumption, because assumptions set us up for suffering. So if we do our best to not assume, we are becoming impeccable with our word. We're not taking things personally. We're not projecting our judgment, our perception out into the world. And that comes back and we create our own divinity, our own heaven on earth. So, if we always do our best, then our life will be rich, it will be full, and intensely satisfying. Maybe with one or the other of the agreements, we start out like the beginning tuba player, just sort of barely playing a scale. But with practice, it gets better and better. It may be being impeccable with our word. It might be making assumptions. It might be taking things personally. But if we practice by doing our best at all times, we will live the life of our choosing. So I ask us now to move into a time of silent meditation. Get yourself comfortable, if you please. And if you feel comfortable, shut your eyes and just settle in, following your breath. Following your breath. And on your next breath, let out with a sigh an assumption that you've made about a loved one or a family member or a friend. And with another breath, let out with a sigh something that you're taking personally. Let go of the past with the next one. And let go of what you have on tap for this afternoon or tomorrow next week. Now I invite you to imagine an impeccable word for you that supports and affirms the truth of who you are, a divine being, a spiritual being having a human experience. And hold that impeccable word in your heart and mind. And do your best to keep that word or those words in your heart as we go into silence. As you continue to hold this word, this impeccable word or words, make a commitment to always do your best, to hold that as the truth of who you are. Make a commitment to do your best, to not take things personally. Take a commitment to do your best always, to not make assumptions. Take another deep breath. Let out a sigh of gratitude as you come back into this room. Look around you at the divine creatures that are sitting here amongst you. Blessings all.